Here is what we need to see happening on Elbaf. And I'm not talking about basic things like Robin and Saul reuniting, or Usopp getting some sort of Usopp moment to help his Usopp character. No, none of that. Because there is so much more we need to explore, and we're going to start with Prince Loki. Finally being able to meet this Prince Loki is probably my most anticipated moment of Elbaf personally. In chapter 858, whilst a rabbit was taking a bath, Charlotte Chiffon told us the story of Lola and Prince Loki, the latter of whom so smitten with the former that he proposed matrimony, only to be rejected and thus inadvertently ruining Big Mom's plans for world domination. I didn't mean world peace. Peace is the one I meant. And when this happened, this was still the very early days of me making videos on this channel. I think this was like 2017. And so Loki was one of the very first mysterious silhouetted figures that I got to cover, the first of a lot. So his presence has quite a bit of nostalgia attached for me personally. But Loki also comes with the promise of learning so much more about how Elbafian society functions. We have no idea what kind of state the nation of Elbaf is in currently, socially, scientifically, politically, warriorifically. And all we do know is that more than a century ago, a very young Mother Carmel warned the world government that executing giants they'd captured would cause the warriors of Elbaf to band together again, thus implying that there's potentially a rather large fracture in their society. Perhaps Elbaf contains multiple tribes of warriors, each led by a particular warlord, and so the main conflict on Elbaf can go on to be about Luffy uniting these factions. In addition to that, we should never forget that Elbaf is part of a greater territory known as Warland. So there may also be neighboring groups of giants, non-Elbafian giants like Jaguar D Sol, for example. He comes from a non-Elbaf tribe, and I think he's currently the only confirmed non-Elbafian giant that we've met, which I get it, not technically true. There are so many different types of giants, I know. Like your ancient giants, your Yeti Cool brothers, your giant hybrids, that they exist. What I mean to say is that Sol is the only standard giant we've met who is confirmed to hail from a not Elbaf place. And the issue we encounter on Elbaf could be that Prince Loki isn't capable of uniting all of these groups. Because here is an absolutely crazy thing about Prince Loki. He is only 63 years old, which sounds pretty old, but Dory and Broggy are 160 years old each, and the two giants we saw in Big Mom's flashback, Jorel and Jarl, were halfway through their 300s. In fact, Loki is even younger than Harudin, one of the youngest known giants, comprising a youthful 81 years. And for a giant, 63, it's nothing. I don't even know if Loki has hit giant adolescence yet, which is very appropriate because that actually puts him in the same sort of position as our classic One Piece royals. The Vivis, the Shirahoshis, and the Momononosuke's. The next generation of young leaders whose allegiance one Monkey D. Luffy manages to seduce with all of his freedom charms. But alongside Loki, I'm also expecting to dip back into the Big Mom story. Not with a huge focus, but Charlotte Lin Lin is a pretty integral aspect of Elbaf's history, considering that she killed one of their legendary warriors and that her daughter rejected Prince Loki. Although if anything, I expect this Big Mom history to be used to galvanize support for Luffy amongst the giants, because he's the one publicly credited as the ringleader who brought down Big Mom and Kaido. Who's Kaido, you ask? Great question. Dunno. To the best of my giant knowledge, Kaido never had any beef or any other form of meat with the giants. But the fact that Luffy orchestrated the defeat of a long-standing enemy of the giants is huge, and I would expect to see a short flashback involving Charlotte Lola as well. Maybe like how we had a short flashback of Ace on Wano, because we knew that he'd been there to learn how to make hats. Skills that he put to use for the sake of Oz Jr., which brings me to my next Elbaf thing. I think it's very possible that we're going to learn more about the existence of ancient giants, which much like Elbaf and the rest of giant culture has been very slowly drip-fed into the story, starting with Oz on Thriller Bark, then Oz Jr. during Marineford, and most recently the numbers on Wano. So this is easy to forget because the numbers themselves are quite forgetful, but they are not natural ancient giants. The numbers were apparently failed attempts at recreating the ancient giants which Kaido brought back with him from Punk Hazard. And given how colorsome they are, my immediate thought is that they were considered failures because Vegapunk didn't get their colors right, especially the pink one, you failure. But this is also more than likely what inspired Big Mom to hire Caesar Clown to do all of the gigantification research, because Charlotte Lin Lin was in absolute awe of these ancient beasts. And even if it was imperfect, the fact that the numbers existed meant it was definitely possible. But the ancient giants might be one of those other speculated tribes living in a different region of Warland, as well as whatever the Yeti Cool brothers were, because they were a very different type of giant. They wore ties and everything and short shorts. And then there's also the hybrids. I would be really keen to discover what the relationship is between giants giants and fishmen, because we know that in at least one case that relationship was very physical. Going back to Long Ring Longland, we met a character named Big Pan, who was a Wotan, a half giant, half fishman. And because there was such terminology readily available, it implies that Wotans aren't all that uncommon. And I really don't think it's strange for these two races to be connected either, because both of them also have ties to the ancient kingdom. The Joy Boys and the Sun Gods. And realistically, if we look at someone like Shirahoshi, she big, and having a giant partner would probably suit her better than most fishmen and mer people. And then there's also the great question of buccaneers. This is the most recent race that we've added to the One Piece catalog, ones that haven't specifically stated to be half human, half giant, and at the moment they're implied to be a third party, conveniently existing in between the two in terms of size. But the reason why I think we may expand more on buccaneers during Elbaf is because of Kuma. We still have him with us. We're still kind of morbidly carrying his shell along with us, and someone on Elbaf might be able to recognize what he is and provide some insight into the history of the buccaneers. Because here's another very, and I mean very important thing to remember about Elbaf: giants have long lives and even longer memories. Because each one of them can live to well over 300, each giant then has the equivalent of something like 6 human generations. And a lot gets forgotten across 6 generations. Knowledge is lost to the great abyss of death. And I mean, how many of you in the comments could even name your great-great-grandparents, let alone retain their life experience? To be fair, the giants probably have a similar issue with their great-great-grandparents, but their perception of time is very different from ours. Take Dory and Brogy, for example, again, each 160 years old, meaning that it's highly likely that their grandparents actually lived during the Void Century. So much like all of O'Hara's knowledge, which is now stored on Elbaf, what has been lost to humanity may very well be retained in the minds of giants, because generationally, they are much closer to the past than we are. They're only 2 stops removed. And with that in mind, the giants might even call it modern history as opposed to ancient history. The oldest potentially still living giant we know of is Jarl, also known as Mountain Beard, or Beard Hill in the official English, but I really don't like that translation. But if Ja Rule was to be alive, then he would be over 400 years old, which, look, I do think is a big ask, because he was already quite withered during Big Mom's flashback 63 years ago. However, if he did still exist in some form, then he's the type of guy who would have all of the stories from his father and grandfather to tell. And that generational perception of time is probably why the giants still retain so much of their ancient values. It's why they remember figures like the sun god Nika, because even if Nika existed 5,000 years ago, our equivalent of that would be a couple of hundred years. So that's why I'm expecting to learn a fair bit more about Nika during Elbaf as well. Often we aim a lot of our theories and speculations straight in the general direction of the face of Joy Boy, the first pirate, and deservedly so, because he may be the most influential figure in history thus far. But even Joy Boy was just another dude carrying on the legacy of Nika. Joy Boy is hypothesized to have been a user of the Nika Nika no Mi, because it's said that his body could stretch like Luffy's. I guess it's not confirmed that he used the fruit, but it is heavily implied. But Joy Boy and Nika are not the same person, and the legend of Nika is a whole tale of its own that I desperately crave to hear. Especially because, as a giant deity, it would mean that Nika himself was likely a giant. So I wonder if he may have done the opposite of what Luffy does. Luffy's big gimmick with Gear 5th right now is becoming a giant, whereas it might be cool if Nika had fun by becoming small. But the idea of the Elbafians worshipping Nika also points to a potential dark history of the island, because Nika was said to be worshipped by slaves of ancient times, desperately praying for liberation. So there could have been a period of history where most of the giant race were enslaved and then liberated by Nika. Or if not history, then a period of giant mythology. But also, it would be kind of cool if each race had their own unique Nika mythology. Sort of like how both Chinese and Indian mythology have their own equivalent of a monkey deity in Sun Wukong and Hanuman respectively, both of whom being figures that Oda heavily borrows from in regards to Luffy, Joy Boy, and Nika, the whole monkey shebang. So it could be that Nika reincarnates, potentially in fruit form, every couple of generations. And at one point in the long forgotten past, Nika was a giant, and Nika freed a bunch of giants, ended up being worshipped by more giants, but then vanished from the world. And a couple of hundred, or maybe even thousands of years later, Nika returned as a buccaneer, doing more freeing of the people, buccaneer people, and in turn was worshipped by the buccaneers. Later down the line, Nika was then reincarnated as a sky person, did some good deeds, had a lot of fun, and that's why the Shandian tribe now also worship the sun god as part of their pantheon. All of the ancient races are very much lining up with this Nika mythology. There are so many races that have their own equivalent of a sun god, and they all seem startlingly similar, yet different. But I should say that when it comes to fishmen, they don't have an equivalent, and that may be because their sun god failed. Joy Boy was the man who made a promise to the ancient mermaid princess, assumedly to ferry the fishmen to the surface and to allow them to live freely under the sun, doing the classic Nika liberation-y stuff. But again, Joy Boy failed. So it makes sense that fishmen don't have their own sun god just yet. If Joy Boy succeeded, they'd probably be worshipping him now as well. And then there's also humans, filthy humans who watch videos about fictional pirates on the internet, who have yet to attach themselves to such a sun god being, and in comes modern-day Luffy to free everyone at once, and is likely going to go on to be regarded as a mythical Nika figure himself several thousand years into the future. But to get a bit more grounded in the present, I also think that Elbaf is going to tell us a lot about trees. I love trees. Firstly, there's the big mystery of the Yggdrasil-like structure on the island itself, but there's a lot of very important trees in One Piece, like the Treasure Tree Adam and the Sunlight Tree Eve, King Balm, Lady Tree, so many trees. But with the Treasure Tree Adam and the Sunlight Tree Eve, we've seen even less of them than the mysterious hulking tree of Elbaf. I also can't help but feel that Elbaf must at least tell us who the man marked by flames is and the Burn Scar Man, just for some series direction if nothing else. Eventually, we need to find this dude guy to get the final road poneglyph so that we can actually go to Laugh Tale. And if he and the Mystery Cube are not on Elbaf, then surely this arc concludes with where to find him, and that becomes the next big inciting incident for the next arc. But also, speaking of big things, there's a lot in this video that I'm fairly confident is going to happen, but there is one Elbaf prediction that I am 100% certain of, which is that Eiichiro Oda is going to use this opportunity to explore some how shall we say, unique angles. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, cast your minds back to chapter 1074, where Oda drew a big panel of everyone together on Egghead having all sorts of fun. And what I love most about this image is Zoro, because he appears to be staring right up York's butt. And he's not the only posterior focused straw hat in this image either. We've also got Usopp closely examining Shaka's butt as well. But we're focused on Zoro here, and Zoro is focused on York. The reason why I love this is because a fan artist drew what Zoro was seeing from his perspective, which is just a whole lot of us. And it's why I've saved this for the back end of the video, because if you put this in the first half, then YouTube says goodbye to your monetization. But long story less long, yes, this is fan art, but this is a taste of what I expect to see Oda actually do on Elbaf. With the certainty of giant women, I don't think that Oda is going to be able to resist his creative urges. And so much like how Oda stated that part of his goal for Egghead Island was to learn how to properly draw erotic butts, he's going to have a very similar goal on Elbaf. And of everything I've said in this video, I feel most confident about this because we all know Oda, and so we all know that Elbaf is going to be our biggest journey to date in every respect.